The airport was alive with movement, a constant, humming symphony of rolling suitcases, clipped footsteps, and the steady murmur of voices blending together like an urban melody. Among the sea of travelers, a young woman moved with quiet confidence, her posture poised, her expression serene. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was Zara Bennett, and today was supposed to be a day of triumph. Her first-class boarding pass was clenched in her hand, not as a symbol of privilege, but as a hard-earned reward for years of relentless work. The scholarship she had won was proof of that. Today wasn't about luxury, it was about celebration. As Zara strolled into the exclusive first-class lounge, the air changed. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered, newspapers rustled, and soft jazz hummed in the background. Business travelers lounged in leather chairs, sipping lattes and tapping away on laptops, secure in their unspoken entitlement to the space. She took a seat, placing her phone and coffee on the table before her, her fingers brushing over her ticket once more, not out of uncertainty, but anticipation. This was a new chapter, a moment to breathe before the next great adventure. A text from her father appeared on her screen. About to board. Let me know when you're settled. Zara smiled, warmth flooding her chest. Victor Bennett wasn't just her father. He was the man behind the very airline she was about to fly on. But if there was one thing he had always instilled in her, it was humility. Titles, wealth, power, none of it defined a person's worth. It was how they treated others that mattered. And so, few knew who she really was. She preferred it that way. She wanted to succeed on her own merits, not her name. Zara adjusted the strap of her bag and rose, heading toward the gate. The first-class boarding line moved swiftly, passengers greeted with effortless smiles by the flight crew. A polished businessman was welcomed aboard with a warm nod. A woman in designer heels received a courteous, "Enjoy your flight." Then, it was Zara's turn. Claudia Harper, the lead flight attendant, took one look at her and something shifted. The polite warmth hardened into something cooler, more scrutinizing. Claudia scanned Zara's ticket, and a single eyebrow arched, skepticism flickering across her sharp features. She hesitated, her lips curving into a tight, forced smile. "Economy is just down the aisle, miss," she said smoothly, her manicured hand gesturing toward the back of the plane. For a brief moment, Zara simply blinked. "I'm sorry," she asked, her voice even, though her pulse had quickened. "Economy," Claudia repeated, her tone polite but firm. "You must be mistaken." Zara frowned, glancing at the boarding pass in her hand. "There's no mistake," she said, carefully enunciating every word. "This is my seat. First class." Passengers behind her shifted impatiently, their irritation palpable. Claudia's smile thinned. "Look, let's not make this difficult. Just head to economy, and we can avoid any issues." A beat of silence passed. Zara's grip on her carry-on tightened. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. They weren't just about a seat. They were about something much deeper, much uglier. A part of her wanted to let it go, to avoid making a scene. But another part, stronger, firmer, knew better. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Always carry yourself with dignity, even when others don't. Zara inhaled, steadying herself. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor," she said, her voice unwavering. Claudia's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling into one of cool indifference. "That won't be necessary." "Oh, I think it is," Zara countered, lifting her chin slightly. "Because unless I'm mistaken, you're telling me I don't belong in a seat I paid for." Passengers murmured now, eyes darting toward them. Some glanced at Zara with curiosity, others with silent judgment. But no one spoke up. Claudia's lips pressed together. "Wait here," she said finally, before turning sharply on her heel and disappearing toward the cockpit. Zara remained rooted in place, her breath controlled, but her fingers still clenched around the boarding pass. The knot of humiliation tightened in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't let it consume her. Not here. Not now. Minutes stretched. Then, footsteps returned. Another flight attendant, this one older, with an air of quiet authority, approached. Her gaze swept over Zara, then down at the boarding pass she still held firmly in her grasp. A pause. Then, her voice, clear and calm. "Miss Bennett, I apologize for the confusion. Please allow me to escort you to your seat." A hush fell over the immediate area. Claudia's face stiffened, her jaw tightening as understanding dawned. Zara met her eyes. There was no gloating in her gaze, no satisfaction, just quiet certainty. She had known all along who she was. And now, so did everyone else. As Claudia strode away, Zara stood motionless, her cheeks burning with a mix of humiliation and disbelief. The murmurs around her grew louder, passengers stealing glances, some curious, others judgmental. The weight of their scrutiny settled over her like a suffocating blanket, but she refused to let it shake her resolve. She had done nothing wrong. She belonged here. Minutes later, Claudia returned, her posture stiff with authority, her voice deliberately loud as she declared, "Excuse me, miss. I need you to move to the economy section. This seat has been assigned to someone else." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Heads turned, eyes darting between Zara and the flight attendant. The confrontation had escalated into a spectacle, and Claudia seemed to revel in it. Zara met her gaze without flinching. Calmly, she held up her boarding pass. "This is my seat. How can it be assigned to someone else?" Her voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the frustration beneath her controlled tone. Claudia's polite facade cracked, revealing the irritation simmering beneath. Arms crossed, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping an octave. "If you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this and call security." The tension in the cabin thickened. Across the aisle, a businessman leaned toward his companion, whispering, "Looks like someone's trying to game the system." An older woman nearby frowned. "This doesn't seem right," she murmured, shaking her head. But not everyone was sympathetic. A man seated a few rows back muttered, "If she doesn't belong here, the attendant has every right to remove her." Claudia, sensing her control slipping, made the ultimate power play. She called for security. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers entered the plane, their presence sending a ripple of unease through the cabin. Their expressions were firm, their stance authoritative. They approached Zara's seat, their eyes scanning the scene. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice even but commanding, "we've been asked to escort you to another seat." Zara inhaled sharply. She wasn't going to let them reduce her to a problem that needed removal. Holding up her boarding pass once again, she looked each of them in the eye. "This is my assigned seat. I have every right to be here." The officers hesitated, exchanging a glance before looking to Claudia for confirmation. Claudia, emboldened, nodded curtly. "Her seat is in economy," she stated, her voice laced with satisfaction. Despite Zara's valid ticket and clear protests, the officers deferred to Claudia. One of them gestured down the aisle. "Please follow us." Zara's pulse pounded in her ears, but she refused to let them see her break. Chin lifted, she rose from her seat, walking past the staring passengers with as much dignity as she could muster. But the sting of humiliation cut deep. Back in first class, Claudia strolled through the cabin, radiating triumph. She shot a smirk toward a fellow flight attendant and said, just loud enough for passengers to hear, "That's how you handle troublemakers. First class is for people who actually belong here." Some passengers chuckled, but others exchanged uneasy glances. A few shifted in their seats, discomfort creeping into their expressions. Meanwhile, in the cramped economy section, Zara sat still, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her breathing controlled despite the whirlwind of emotions raging inside her. She glanced at her phone, an unsaid text glowing on the screen. "This isn't right, Dad. Why didn't they believe me?" Her fingers hovered over the send button. She knew her father would act immediately, and he would not be subtle about it. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a determined exhale, she typed, "They moved me to economy. The flight attendant claimed my seat was a mistake." Victor Bennett's reply came almost instantly. "Stay calm. I'll handle it. Let me know if anything else happens." Zara gripped her phone tightly, her father's unwavering support giving her strength. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. This wasn't over. A little while later, she rose from her seat, stretching her legs as she made her way toward the bathroom. As she waited, a soft voice behind her caught her attention. "I saw what happened earlier." Turning, Zara found herself face to face with an older woman from first class. The woman's eyes were filled with concern, her voice tinged with quiet indignation. "That wasn't right," she continued gently. "You didn't deserve that. If there's anything I can do, just say the word." For a brief moment, Zara was caught off guard by the woman's kindness. She managed a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you. But I'll be okay." The woman nodded, squeezing Zara's arm lightly. "You're handling this with grace. More than most people would." With one last reassuring smile, she returned to her seat, leaving Zara standing in the narrow aisle, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and determination. Back in first class, Claudia Harper was still basking in her self-proclaimed victory. She leaned against the galley, speaking to her colleagues with an air of smug satisfaction. "She thought she could just waltz in and claim a first-class seat," Claudia scoffed. "It takes experience to see through that kind of nonsense. I had to put her where she rightly belongs." Some of her fellow attendants chuckled politely, but others averted their eyes. A few exchanged uneasy glances, sensing how unprofessional, how cruel, her comments truly were. The murmurs among the passengers hadn't died down, and the energy in the cabin was shifting. Zara, back in her economy seat, sat composed despite the storm inside her. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, her eyes fixed on the small window beside her. The clouds stretched endlessly outside, their vastness calming and infuriating all at once. She refused to let Claudia's prejudice define her. She refused to let this be the end of the story. Then, slowly, she reached up and pressed the small call button above her seat. The soft chime rang out, a seemingly simple request, but in this moment, it was an act of quiet defiance. Minutes passed. Attendants moved up and down the aisle, tending to passengers with ease. But no one stopped at Zara's row. No one acknowledged her request. Then, finally, Claudia Harper appeared, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her expression was unreadable, her movements brisk. She stopped beside Zara's seat, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Yes?" Claudia asked, her voice clipped, her tone cold. Zara met her gaze with quiet confidence. "Could I have a glass of water, please?" Her voice was steady, her tone calm. A simple request. But in that moment, it was everything. Claudia's carefully composed mask was slipping. The moment she had prided herself on, asserting dominance over a passenger she deemed unworthy of first class, was now crumbling into a waking nightmare. Every passing second felt like an unbearable weight pressing down on her chest. She had made a mistake, a colossal one. And worse, there was no undoing it. The one smug flight attendant now felt the curious, scrutinizing gazes of passengers who had witnessed her behavior. They had seen her relish in her authority, dismiss Zara's rightful claims, and treat her with veiled contempt. But now, their eyes carried something different, a silent acknowledgement that the tables had turned. Claudia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the cuffs of her uniform, trying to compose herself. The flight was still airborne, but she knew the moment they touched down, her reckoning would begin. The image of Victor Bennett, the ruthless and influential airline mogul, burned in her mind. She had never met him personally, but his reputation preceded him. This was a man who did not tolerate failure, especially when it involved his family. Across the aisle, Zara remained composed, though her fingers curled slightly around her phone. The reality of the situation was setting in. Her father was taking action. And when Victor Bennett took action, people listened. The cold dismissal, the humiliating escort to economy, the intentional neglect, all of it had been a power play by Claudia. But now, the power was shifting, and Zara could sense it. The first-class cabin, once a quiet sanctuary of exclusivity, now carried an air of unease. Some passengers exchanged looks, some whispered amongst themselves, and a few pretended to be engrossed in their entertainment screens, unwilling to be caught in the tension. Claudia could feel the shift, the growing awareness that something significant was about to unfold. She was no longer the one in control. Minutes dragged like hours. Then, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be beginning our descent shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and that all electronic devices are in airplane mode." Claudia's stomach twisted into knots. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to take a steadying breath. Perhaps she could explain, reason her way out of it. Perhaps Mr. Bennett would understand that she had only been doing her job. She clung to the hope that this was all being blown out of proportion. After all, how much trouble could one teenage girl cause? But deep down, she knew the truth. It wasn't just about a seat. It was about perception, treatment, and the undeniable fact that she had singled Zara out. And now, she would have to answer for it. As the plane began its descent, Zara sat motionless, her expression unreadable. She could feel the change in the air, a weight shifting onto Claudia, the quiet tension of justice brewing beneath the surface. She wasn't one for revenge, but she also wasn't one to accept injustice without a fight. Her father had made the call. The wheels were already in motion. The plane touched down with a smooth jolt, and Claudia let out a shaky breath. She tried to maintain her composure as she moved through the cabin, but she knew there was no escaping what was coming. The moment the plane taxied to a stop, her worst fear materialized. A suited man stood at the end of the jet bridge, his presence commanding, his expression unreadable. His sharp eyes scanned the disembarking passengers until they landed on Claudia. Victor Bennett. Claudia's breath hitched. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Claudia's fingers curled tightly around the edge of her tray as she moved through the first-class cabin, forcing herself to maintain the facade of composure. But the cracks were beginning to show. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she extended a glass to a passenger, her voice faltering. "Would you like a drink?" The man raised an eyebrow at her uncharacteristically hesitant tone before nodding, his expression one of mild confusion. He didn't ask questions, but the shift in Claudia's demeanor wasn't lost on those around her. The whispers had started. "What's wrong with her?" a flight attendant murmured to a colleague. "She looks like she's seen a ghost," came the hushed reply. The normally poised and sharp-tongued Claudia Harper was unraveling before their eyes. Her usual efficiency had been replaced with a growing unease that seeped into her work. She fumbled orders, misread seat numbers, and delivered drinks to the wrong rows. A passenger asked for tea. She brought coffee. Another requested a blanket. She forgot entirely. More than once, she returned to the galley and simply stood there, gripping the counter as if steadying herself from an unseen force. Her colleagues, accustomed to her usual air of authority, exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just them who noticed. The passengers did, too. They watched with growing curiosity as the once commanding flight attendant made repeated trips to economy class, where Zara sat. The stark contrast in behavior was impossible to ignore. Claudia, who had earlier ignored Zara's request for water with calculated indifference, now seemed desperate to rectify her mistake. But it was too late. Each time Claudia approached, her tray filled with premium snacks and upgraded drinks, Zara met her with the same composed yet distant expression. "Miss Bennet." Claudia's voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Can I get you anything? A drink? A snack? Perhaps a hot towel?" Zara looked up, her face unreadable. "No, thank you." Claudia hesitated. "Are you sure? Anything at all, please, just let me know." Zara shook her head again, her tone polite but firm. "I'm fine." The rejection stung, but Claudia wasn't ready to give up. Over the next hour, she made repeated attempts to placate Zara, offering her the best the airline had to offer: fresh fruit, warm pastries, an exclusive first-class meal. Each time, Zara refused, her demeanor never changing. It wasn't anger that fueled her silence. It was something far more powerful: control. She had nothing to prove. And that terrified Claudia more than anything. Passengers leaned in, whispering amongst themselves, their curiosity mounting. "I've never seen her act like this," one murmured. "She's practically groveling," another chuckled. But Zara wasn't fooled. She knew this wasn't about remorse. It was about fear. Fear of what was waiting for Claudia once they landed. Fear of the name Bennet and the power it carried. And Zara had no intention of making it easier for her. Finally, Claudia abandoned the tray altogether. This time, she approached Zara empty-handed. Her throat felt dry, her pulse drumming in her ears. She crouched slightly, lowering herself to eye level, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Bennet, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't realize." She trailed off, realizing too late that there was no way to finish that sentence without condemning herself further. Zara studied her, her calm demeanor unshaken. Then, with measured words, she said, "The matter is no longer in my hands." Claudia's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Zara's eyes met hers, unwavering. "My father is handling it now. He'll decide whether or not you're forgiven." The words hit Claudia like a sledgehammer. Her stomach twisted into knots as the weight of the situation fully sank in. She opened her mouth to respond, to beg, to plead, but the look in Zara's eyes told her it was pointless. The decision had already been made. She was no longer in control. Zara turned back to her phone, dismissing her without another word. The conversation was over. Claudia stood frozen for a moment before retreating to the galley, her steps slow and unsteady. The whispers among the passengers intensified, but Claudia barely heard them. Her mind was spinning with one thought: what would happen to her once they landed? And then, the descent began. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the usual flurry of passengers gathering their belongings filling the cabin. But this time, there was something different, an undercurrent of anticipation. Through the small, oval windows, passengers caught sight of something unusual. A sleek black SUV had pulled up directly beside the aircraft, its polished surface gleaming under the airport lights. The doors opened, and out stepped Victor Bennet. He was a man of presence, tall, commanding, exuding the quiet power of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He wasn't alone. Two senior executives flanked him, their crisp suits and unreadable expressions making it clear that this was not a social call. Inside the cabin, the murmurs erupted. "Who's that?" "That's Victor Bennet. He owns the airline." "Wait, he came here? For this?" Victor ascended the aircraft stairs with a purposeful stride. The moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. conversations died. All eyes turned to him. He scanned the rows, his gaze landing on Zara in economy class. For a moment, his expression softened. He made his way directly to her, crouching slightly to meet her eye level, his voice warm despite the weight of the situation. "Are you all right?" he asked, his concern evident. Zara looked up, and for the first time since boarding, relief flickered across her face. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice carried the exhaustion of the ordeal. "It's just been a lot." Victor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over now," he promised. "You won't have to deal with this again." Then his expression changed. The warmth was gone. He straightened, his gaze cutting through the cabin like a blade. Slowly, he turned to Claudia. She was already standing, her posture stiff, her face drained of color. She knew what was coming. "Miss Harper," Victor began, his voice even but sharp. "I understand there was an issue with my daughter's seat." Claudia's lips parted, but no sound came out. When she finally found her voice, it was a mere whisper. I didn't know she was your daughter, sir. It was a misunderstanding." Victor's eyes didn't waver. "The issue isn't whether or not you knew," he said, his tone cutting through the silence. "The issue is how you treated her, and likely how you treat others who don't fit your assumptions." Claudia swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize." Victor raised a hand slightly, silencing her. "Your actions today have been nothing short of unacceptable. This airline was built on respect, fairness, and professionalism. Your behavior has failed those values." And then, before she could say another word, the passengers erupted into applause. The cabin filled with the sound of clapping, murmurs of agreement rippling through the rows. Some passengers nodded, others exchanged glances of satisfaction. Claudia, however, stood paralyzed, her world crashing down around her. This was just the beginning. Claudia stood frozen, her breath shallow, her hands trembling as they gripped the service cart like a lifeline. The applause that echoed through the cabin was deafening, not in volume, but in what it represented, a public condemnation, a resounding verdict that she was guilty. Each clap felt like a nail driving deeper into her humiliation. Her mouth parted slightly, an apology forming, but before she could utter a single word, Victor Bennett delivered his final judgment. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice crisp and unwavering as he turned to the airline executives flanking him. "Miss Harper is to be removed from duty. Her behavior today does not align with the standards of this airline, and she will be held accountable." The weight of his words crashed down like a gavel striking a bench. One of the executives gave a curt nod before stepping forward. "Miss Harper, please come with us." His tone was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Claudia's breath hitched as she darted frantic glances around the cabin, as if searching for an escape, an ally, someone to save her from this fate. But all she saw were passengers staring at her, some in hushed whispers, others shaking their heads in quiet judgment. Her gaze landed on Zara, who met her eyes with a calm, unwavering expression. There was no smugness, no gloating, just a quiet certainty that justice had been served. That was, perhaps, the most devastating blow of all. As Claudia was led off the plane, murmurs rippled through the rows. "She had it coming," someone muttered. "You can't treat people like that and expect no consequences." In her seat, Zara exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. Relief flooded her, but it wasn't just that. It was something deeper, a sense of quiet vindication, a confirmation that standing up for herself had not been in vain. She had spent her life being told to let things go, to pick her battles carefully. But today, she had fought back, and she had won. Victor turned back to his daughter, his presence steady and reassuring. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, softer this time. Zara nodded, her voice stronger than before. "I am now. Thank you, Dad." A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You never have to thank me for standing up for you," he said. "It's what I'm here for." As the passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, many cast Zara glances of admiration and quiet respect. The girl who had been dismissed as just another economy-class passenger had proven to be something far more. In the weeks that followed, Victor Bennett wasted no time ensuring that this incident would never be repeated. Deeply committed to the principles that had built his airline, he personally oversaw a complete overhaul of staff training programs. The changes weren't cosmetic, they were structural, systemic, and uncompromising. The airline implemented mandatory workshops on diversity, inclusion, and respect, designed to challenge unconscious biases and force employees to confront the real-world consequences of discrimination. Role-playing exercises placed flight attendants in scenarios meant to push their understanding of fairness and dignity. Guest speakers shared raw, personal stories of prejudice, ensuring that no one walked away from the training untouched. Meanwhile, Claudia Harper had vanished from the airline, dismissed from her position in disgrace. For weeks, she avoided anything that reminded her of that flight. The humiliation, the shame, the way her name had become a cautionary tale whispered among her former colleagues, it was unbearable. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. The anger she initially felt began to fade, replaced by something she wasn't accustomed to, self-reflection. For the first time, she truly examined her actions, her mindset, the deeply ingrained biases she had never questioned. It was uncomfortable. It was painful. But it was necessary. One evening, sitting alone at her kitchen table, Claudia opened her laptop and began to type. The email she crafted was long, raw, and carefully worded. Every sentence was deliberate, every admission of fault genuine. She didn't just apologize for her actions toward Zara. She apologized for the way she had viewed people like Zara her entire life. "I can't undo the harm I caused," she wrote, "but I am committed to learning from this and ensuring it never happens again. If given the chance, I would like to prove that I have changed." When Victor Bennett read her email, he sat back in his chair, thoughtful. He had seen empty apologies before, hollow words meant only to salvage reputations. But in Claudia's words, he saw something different. He saw sincerity. And sincerity, when coupled with action, was worth something. After consulting with his team, Victor made a decision. Claudia would be given a second chance, but under strict probation. Every aspect of her performance and behavior would be scrutinized, and any misstep would mean immediate and permanent dismissal. Claudia returned to the airline, but she was not the same person who had once wielded authority like a weapon. She threw herself into the training, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She volunteered to speak about her own experience, about the humiliation of being held accountable and the painful process of unlearning prejudice. Slowly, her colleagues noticed the change. The flight attendant, who had once dismissed passengers based on assumptions, had become someone who went out of her way to ensure every traveler felt seen, heard, and valued. Meanwhile, Victor Bennett didn't stop at internal changes. At a press conference weeks later, he addressed the media with the same unwavering confidence that had built his empire. "Inclusion is not optional," he declared. "It's a responsibility. Privilege comes with obligations, whether it's the privilege of serving passengers or the privilege of sitting in first class. We all have a duty to treat each other with respect and dignity. No one should ever feel unwelcome or unworthy because of their appearance or background." His words struck a chord. The story went viral. Social media exploded with conversations about prejudice, accountability, and change. Hashtags like #InclusionMatters and #RespectForAll trended for days, as people shared their own stories and called for lasting reform. Victor was praised for his leadership and transparency, but more importantly, the conversation continued beyond just one airline. His stance sparked a wider dialogue about systemic bias in the service industry and beyond. As for Zara, the experience became a defining moment in her life. Reflecting on everything that had happened, she understood now that strength wasn't just about enduring injustice, it was about confronting it. Her father's unwavering support had reinforced what she had always known deep down. Dignity and respect were not things to be earned, they were fundamental rights. Weeks later, Zara and Victor found themselves on another flight, seated side by side in first class. The atmosphere felt different, not just because of the training programs, not just because of the new policies, but because something intangible had shifted. The air felt lighter, the service effortless yet warm. When a flight attendant approached her with a smile, offering a drink, Zara accepted with a nod, returning the smile with one of her own. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, no silent judgment. She glanced at her father, and he met her gaze knowingly. This flight was a far cry from the last one, and the difference was palpable. Change wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. But it was always worth fighting for. If you believe in standing up for fairness, equality, and respect for everyone, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. See you in the next one.